We've been studying the book of First John, and what we've seen in the book of First John are questions that John is trying to help this group of people that are meeting, that love Jesus, that are trying to work through things that they've experienced, people that had attended their church that no longer are part of it, people denying Jesus. And what John wants to do is help them to understand that they can really know God, and they can be known by Him. And being not only known by God, that they can have something called assurance. They can know for sure not only about Him, but they can walk in this way. So as John starts to work through these things of assurance, he notices as he starts to talk about these things, he talks about, one of the ways that we know is by listening and obeying what He has to say. And then he talks about, in the last one here that he gives, the third test, was the way that you know is what you do with Jesus particularly. Do you think He is God's anointed? Do you think He is this Christ figure? If you don't think that, then you can't know Him. John's pretty abundantly clear about that. But if you do know that He's the Christ, you do and you can know Him. So what's going to happen here in 1 John chapter 3 is what we're going to be looking at this morning. John's going to have this, what I call an outburst. He is going to, because he's talking about this relationship, we can know God, he is going to come into grips with this reality himself. And he's not going to be able to contain himself. So he starts this off, 1 John chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. All who have this hope in Him purify themselves just as He is pure. Everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. But you know that He appeared so that He might take away our sins. And in Him is no sin. No one who lives in Him keeps on sinning. No one who continues to sin has either seen Him or known Him. Dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray. The one who does what is right is righteous, just as He is righteous. The one who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. No one who is born of God will continue to sin, because God's seed remains in them. They cannot go on sinning, because they have been born of God. This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not God's child, nor is anyone who does not love their brother and sister. What John's going to be pointing out here is that this outburst he has, these assurances, what do they produce in us? They make us children of God. Not only that, John's going to say there's fatherly advice on how to live in Him. And the third thing is he's going to talk about a fullness to come. He's going to talk about living as children or being part of God's family as children of God. He's going to talk about fatherly advice and a fullness to come. Have you ever seen on Facebook, which is probably the only thing it's good for nowadays, the only thing you see on Facebook, videos where kids are surprised by parents that have been deployed and they get to see them for the first time? A lot of the videos that I've seen, which you have to wait to the end, is there'll be kids who have never either met their parents or who knew them at an early age, but the parents have been deployed for a series of time or years. And what they normally do is they kind of make a pretty big to-do. So the kid maybe FaceTime or talks with dad or mom overseas, but then the day comes and they have no idea. So the day comes and either it's at a school or it's at the home, or they use some type of mechanism like a gift. They put the dad will be hiding and he'll kind of come out. And so the one I remember seeing, the last one I saw was the kid was in karate class and his teacher had blindfolded him to hit whatever they hit. And as he's doing that, the dad comes out and he's thinking he's wrestling with the teacher, but it's dad. When he pulls the blindfold off, what happens? So the reality that you see the kid, he's in shock. Because it takes him a minute to take in all that he just had witnessed and then there's an expression after that. Now, there's nothing information-wise new about the dad. It's not like the kid learned something different about him. He didn't learn anything new nothing new is about that developed in the relationship. He's a child, he's his father, and this is what John is experiencing. John gets so excited here, there becomes an outburst. We really don't see it in the NIV or in this translation, but it's the first word here, see. The word really means to behold. It means like to look, and it has an emphatic part to it. And so what John says, after he has just talked about this assurance, he goes, behold, look. Like he's excited. It's as if the veil had just come off and he had seen the Father and he's reliving, experiencing something great, the relationship he has with God. Not only that, this outburst of belonging. Look, he says. He also talks about the depth of this relationship. He says, see what great love the Father has lavished on us. Another thing that's really interesting, this word great here, I don't think is a good translation because it's an idiom. And what he's saying is this. John is like, the veil comes off and he goes, behold, of what country did this love come from? That's how the idiom is translated, of what country. And we get the word great. It's a little undersell for what he's saying. So John is saying this. He's talking about assurance. He says, do you realize that you are children of God? And then John has a moment where that reality becomes so real to him. He's like, behold, you know what love has come into us? It's foreign, like it's from another planet. It's out of this world. That's what he's saying. This expression here of out of this world or out of this country, Jesus had calmed the winds and the seas miraculously. He gets up and he's like, be still. The disciples, as they're witnessing all of these things, this is what they said. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. The word what kind is this word great. So when they saw the winds and the seas just stop on a dime, what kind? This is not from this world. So what John says as he talks about assurance, he goes, we have a love that comes to us that's not from this world. It's so radical to him. He goes, look, behold. It's as if he wants to take the veil off to see the Father. You know he's there. You know he's deployed. You've seen him on video chat, but have you experienced him? Do you know him? This is what he talks about, this relationship that we have with the Father. This relationship, he's going to talk, is a relationship of family. Chapter 2, verse 29. If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone who does what is right has been born of him. John sees this beholding, this incredible love from another planet that has just come into our hearts and minds, that this love is because we have been born of him. This relationship of being born in him means that we've been adopted. We are part of his family. John, in his fuller gospel, the Gospel of John, he writes this in John chapter 1, verse 12. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave them the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of a human decision, or of a husband's will, but born of God. This being born of God, how has God done this? He says, John says, behold, what kind of love has come into this? The Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God. He talks about the reality of what God has done through the resurrection is so perfect and complete that what it's done, it's brought us in as children. We're no longer on the outside. He's brought us in. And the language that he uses here, the word of lavishing on us, the strength of this word is really rooted in the idea of a marriage, where a husband would say I do to you, and the wife says I do to the husband. It's a commitment, it's public, It's something that's supposed to be representing the church and Christ. And what John is saying is having this outburst, this expression, this moment. He goes, do you really see it? Can you behold it? Can you see him? The next thing that he talks about here, not only as living as children, he talks about fatherly advice. You know, some of us have good memories of our father and their advice, and others of us, sadly, do not. And that's kind of a tragedy when we think about fathers. We think about not only their role, their responsibility, but also for a lot of us, we think about their absence. We think about them and their failures and things of that nature, how that's impacted our lives. And so we're used to some fatherly advice, things like, I told you so, I'm not paying for that. But also we've heard words of like, I love you. There's appreciation. When I think of fatherly advice, and I think, how does that work into being that we are children? Twitter is good for a couple of things, I think better than Facebook, but Twitter has some things on it that what they would call going viral or that. And there was a story this last week, I thought it was great. Claire O'Connor from Brooklyn has been contemplating buying herself a Peloton bike. Now, Peloton bike's a pretty high-end, stationary bicycle, and it has this interaction with a trainer on the other end. It's a really, really nice monitor that goes right in front. But it's just a bike that has like resistance like a regular bike does, but it's got this monitor, it's interactive. It's kind of a really cool thing, but super expensive. She's been contemplating buying herself a Peloton bike, like many others. O'Connor had told BuzzFeed News she had taken classes at the cycling company's New York City studio and has friends who love their own bikes. She added that she has also been sucked in by the over-the-top ads, which is understandable. I think because I Googled it, I've been deluged by ads on Instagram and Facebook, and well, they almost won this round, she said. Recently, she was chatting with her mom about whether she wanted to make the purchase. Her mom thought it was a good idea. Then her mom told O'Connor's dad, Colin. A few minutes later, she got an epic, totally unprompted email from him. O'Connor's dad did not see the appeal of a Peloton bike, and he proceeded to tell her why. I have heard of the Peloton and have concluded that, like the use of cocaine, it's another way of God saying people have too much money. It is a ridiculous amount of money for such a basic concept as riding a stationary bike. You can ride a bike you own for as long as you want and cut the inevitable boredom factor by listening to podcasts or watching TV clips or waves on sand. The idea of looking at a screen while some cycling pro broadcasts encouragement is preposterous. I would implore you not to waste precious after-tax income for the latest to encourage social strivers to show that they live at a more rarefied level than the rest. That's advice. Dad's like, don't waste your money. What are you doing? Now, she had taken that, put it on Twitter, and it was fascinating to see so many people say, yeah, he's right. That is a waste of money. Well, why in the world would we do that? I feel bad for Peloton. You better sell their stock if you got it. It's going down. But the idea here is fatherly advice. It's listening to voices that are competing for space in our hearts. John says, verse 7, dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray. What John understands is that there's a lot of voices that will be speaking to you, telling you how to live and what you should do. And what he says is, the one who does what is right is righteous, just as he is righteous. As he talks about it, he says, John understands that these Christians, these children, are hearing so many things. Verse 6, it says, no one who lives in him, as you're part of his family, no one is a child of him, keeps on sinning. No one who continues to sin has either seen him or known him. And this is what John's point is. If you're a child of God, if you've beholded his glory, if you've seen him, you've experienced him, if that has become the reality for you in your life, you should be more like him. Because his advice, what he says about you, what he calls you to do, is more important than any other voice that you hear. You are part of him. And then it comes into this idea, what do we believe about him? And what he says is this. The more you hear him and the more that you listen to him, you're going to follow him because as you believe something about him, he's not only your father, but that he loves you, that he brought you in. And you're going to keep a pattern in your life. You're going to follow him. And when he says the things to obey, you're going to obey him. Why? Because you're going to realize, hey, the Peloton bike is not what I need right now. And who told me that? My dad told me that. But more simply is this. The way that we understand the Father is by listening to his words. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verse 14. No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you may obey it. Psalm 119:11. I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. The way that we have an ability to stand up towards sin is in our ability to not only understand what our Father's will is for our lives, by thinking about it, by wrestling with it, by understanding it, because what we believe about our Father is that he wants good for us, that he honestly wants that. And what we understand here is in verse 4, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. We start to come to grips with our depravity, with our sin. We see that our sin not only harms others, but it's not fulfilling what God's called us to do. It doesn't allow us to live in the obedience that he wants us to live in. So what it does in the relationship of the family gives us a perspective about decisions that we're going to make, or decisions that have been made towards us. We understand that sin is lawlessness. It's breaking what God has commanded us to do. Not only that, we see to the great lengths that Jesus went to deal with that sin and that lawlessness. Verse 5. But you know that he appeared so that he might take away our sins, and in him is no sin. John not only wants them to listen to their Father, he wants these children to feel his embrace. That the way that he's made them children, it came at a cost to him. He lost everything. He gave everything up. He has dealt with the transgressions, the sins that we have committed. And the way that he's brought us in as children, it wasn't just, okay, I'll let you off this time. It cost him everything. And when he sacrificed, he absorbed, he took on that sin. He then can say with all clarity, with all authority, I can now adopt you as children, as sons and daughters. And the way that we enter into that relationship is by faith. So our heart should be, Father, what do you have for us? How do we fulfill not only what you've created us to be, but how do we walk that out? We have to listen to him. We have to meditate upon his word. You know, I love this in Psalm 1 and 2, which are the introductory psalms of the whole book. They're kind of like the intro. In Psalm 1, it talks about meditating upon God's law, that we should meditate upon God's law day and night. The word meditate there is not Eastern mysticism where you clear your mind of all things. It's actually quite different. Meditation is taking his word, his thoughts, and filling our mind, and it's kind of like examining it. Like if you were to go around each of the words, and you were to think about the sentences, and you were to think of it larger in the context of the book, and think about what does this actually mean? God, what do you mean by these words? How can I apply this to my life? And what David says is, what I do is I take what he has said, and I allow it to be in the forefront of my mind. I think through it, constantly dwelling on it because I'm concerned about what my Father says. The reason that we don't do that, I think C.S. Lewis had a great story, and I'll read it to you, about why we choose not to do those things. He goes, when I was a child, I often had toothache. And I knew that if I went to my mother, she would give me something which would deaden the pain for that night and let me get to sleep. But I did not go to my mother, at least, not till the pain became very bad. And the reason I did not go was this. I did not doubt she would give me the aspirin, but I knew she would also do something else. I knew she would take me to the dentist the next morning. I could not get what I wanted out of her without getting something more, which I did not want. I wanted immediate relief from the pain, but I could not get it without having my teeth set permanently right. And I knew those dentists. I knew they started fiddling about with all sorts of other teeth which had not yet begun to ache. They would not let sleeping dogs lie. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And what Lewis says in that story is this. We come to God, we say, God, here's the problem in my life. I need advice on what I should do. That's not how it works. God is like the dentist. You come to him for the toothache, he's going to start exploring other teeth, other things in your life. He's going to start to examine and look. He's going to start to expose things to you. For what? Because he wants you to flourish as a person. He's not interested in just treating it and being done. He's looking for preventative things. He's showing us parts of our life and our heart that we might not know exist. He's exposing them and say, hey, not only do you have a cavity, but you're going to need a root canal. That tooth is cracked over there. That one needs a filling. And then he goes, let me show you what's happening. And what God does constantly, because he's our Father, he's just not settled just to deal with the one piece of pain. He starts to give us advice by the power of the Spirit to reveal ourselves so that we could see ourselves, so that we can become more like him. He's a Father who loves us so much. You know, that the girl who was talking to her mom, she didn't ask for her dad's advice. He gave it anyway. He did that because he loves his daughter. And what God will constantly do with us is constantly love us by showing things in our life, revealing sin to us so that we can repent of it, so that we will not continue in sin any longer, but that we would embrace him. The last point I want to talk about is this idea of fullness to come. Verse 2, it says, "Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All who have this hope," what's the hope? That we will see him and we will know fully as he is, okay? "In him purify themselves just as he is pure." And what is happening and what John is working through here speaks to this need that we all have of fullness. We all want to feel full and satisfied. We all want that expression, that feeling. That's why when we eat food that's good food and it's good for us, that we come in hungry, but we come in full. But there's times when we come and we eat something, we're like, I'm still hungry. There's something inside of me that says, I need to eat something else. That fullness that John is saying, he goes, as children, we will be, has not yet been made known. There are things that we will experience on this other side of death that we will not only understand, but will become into a fullness. You see, Christianity is not, when I die, I just float up into heaven and I'm good. Christianity is that we have a life in a body now. It's corrupted by sin, by decay. But death, after death, we have a new body. And then this world, Revelation 21 and 22, will be renewed. He's going to take everything and make it the way that it was designed to be, in its fullness, without the death and decay. So there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. And the last picture in the whole Bible is this: them coming back together. How does it happen? There's a city, a new Jerusalem, and it descends to the earth, and everything becomes new. So what he's saying is that there's an anticipation and a fullness in our body that we have not yet discovered yet. But it's coming. And when you see him, all the decay, all the things that we've experienced, it'll make sense. Because you will be complete in him. It's a fullness that we are looking for. C.S. Lewis says this, I love this: most people, if they had really learned to look into their own hearts, would know what they want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world which offer to give it to you, but they never quite keep their promise. The longing which arises in us when we fall in love or first think of some foreign country or take up some subject that excites us, are longings which no marriage, travel, learning can really satisfy. And Lewis's point is, at the heart of all of us, there's something that we don't feel full. We feel satisfied, but man, I just don't feel full. What John is promising is there's a hope as children that when we see him, that we will be satisfied, that we will be full. There are ways that we deal with that. He talks about one of the ways of how people cope with that. It's called the fool's way. The reason, he goes, we put the blame on the things themselves, the reason we don't feel full. He goes on all his wife, the fool, thinking that if only he had tried another woman or went for a more expensive holiday or whatever it is, then this time he would really catch the mysterious something we are all after. Most of the bored, discontented rich people in the world are this type. They spend their whole lives trotting from woman to woman through the divorce courts, from continent to continent, from hobby to hobby, always thinking that the latest is the real thing at last, and always disappointed. But he talks about the delusioned way, where you just are disillusioned with the world and you don't care. And you're just sitting by yourself with everything going around you and say, what does it even matter? You've given up. But then Lewis talks about the third way, the Christian way. The Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hungry. Well, there's such thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, this does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for the earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of a copy, echo, or mirage. And what Lewis' point is this, is that in the Christian, that need to be satisfied will not be met in anything here. And what John says, it will be met in the life to come, in the bodily resurrection that all those who believe in him, all of those who know him will experience. And he goes, if you have that hope, it'll purify you. It'll bring a cleansing. It'll bring a washing. It'll bring a resolve to say, God, I want to follow you. What you say about my life is what I'm going to choose to believe. So when you speak to me about how I should live and how I should treat others, I'm going to do it by faith. It might feel uncomfortable. No one else in the culture might do it, but I'm going to do it by faith because I love you. And there's a hope and a resolve that there's satisfaction there that nothing else can bring. It's a hope that we all need, and a hope in a world to come that he's preparing for his people. When he's going to take heaven and earth and bring them back together like the Garden of Eden. And we're going to experience his joy. We're going to experience his fullness. And the resurrection is when it all became the reality. The resurrection from the dead, when Jesus rose from the dead, that reality, Jesus conquered death. He conquered the enemy. And he has a physical body saying there is life after death. There is life after death. There is a life to come, a fullness that we right now only know in part. And there's a hope in him, trust in him. And when you see him, you will be known. The satisfaction, the things that your hearts need, that you're finding in other things, you'll be known completely and you'll be satisfied. It'll be over. And all the things that we have right now, the pain that we're going through, the disappointment, the loss, the questions, he knows all that. He suffered just like all of us. He was tempted. He never came in, never sinned. But what he did was he showed us a way about how to love his Father, about how to love people. So when he's on a cross dying, what does he say? Hey, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. he was able to demonstrate what it means to be part of a kingdom of his Father. He said, the kingdom is here. Repent and believe the good news of the gospel that he's come, that through his resurrection, you can experience hope yourself.